Why did the Sega Saturn fail? Well, let's look at it from a business perspective. Pretty simple explanation, actually. So let's get into it. Well, let's talk about my favorite machine. And I mean my favorite machine of all time, the Sega Saturn. To me, the Sega Saturn is the most beautiful machine from the past and still is. This console looks better today than most new release consoles. I mean, by far looks better than the PlayStation 5 or anything else you put out there against it. You know, for me, it has the perfect retro design. Like if I was going to make a retro console today, I would make it look like the Sega Saturn. You have a cartridge slot and you have a CD slot. You couldn't ask for more, right? It really is like a mother lode of creating physical products for a particular machine, right? And I don't know why there's not more homebrews in this and why people haven't exploited it more. But, you know, if somebody's producing cartridges for this today, I would definitely buy them. Guys, what I wanted to do here is reflect on the Sega Saturn because a lot of the failures that you see in companies today, you can see here too, right? They say if you don't learn from history, it's bound to repeat itself. And it always does. You know, whenever companies they make these mistakes, they end up in the same place, right? And you can recognize them early on when they do them. So if we think about the Sega Saturn, and for those of you who are younger, the younger members of my audience, right, who weren't around in 1995, let me tell you, the Sega Saturn was a 32-bit machine that was released by Sega in 1995. Now, despite it being successful in Japan way back in the day, it really failed to get a foothold here in North America. And it was ultimately considered a commercial failure. There's several factors for that, right? Number one, for me, I would say bad PR. That's where it started, right? And that came from the internal strifes going on at Sega at the time. But there's other factors that contributed to the failure of the machine in the United States, including, you know, intense competition from other consoles and the lack of strong exclusive titles. Of course, and along with confusing marketing, because it really was terrible marketing, right? And we can recognize those things today in other companies. We can. One of the major factors that contributed to the Sega Saturn failure in the United States was, number one, it was releasing at the same time as the Sony PlayStation. They even released it earlier, but at a higher price. But the Sony PlayStation already had a buzz and had much, much better PR. You know, when they came out and said the price of the Sony PlayStation, it was $100 less than the Sega, that's pretty much where it ended. People didn't even want to see what the machine did. They didn't consider anything else. You know, they just saw two machines that did pretty much the same thing, but one of them was $100 cheaper. And don't forget, at the same time, you had the Nintendo 64, which was groundbreaking when it comes to 3D. You know, it really, really was. And of course, you had the Jaguar and the 3DO trying to sell the same thing. So Sony really, really got a foot ahead of everybody else. And, you know, it goes down in history as Nintendo's biggest mistake, you know, not honoring the deal with PlayStation back in the day. And I tell you, if you think of this machine, it really has the specific structure of that early Nintendo PlayStation. This, you know, this form factor right here would be perfect for anybody making a retro machine today. You have a cartridge slot and you have a CD slot. You can make physical media for this thing forever, right? If you had the right amount of power, if you came out with something like this. But to me, this has been the most beautiful machine of all time, aesthetically. I mean, it's not even close with anything else, for me personally, right? Now, another factor that contributed to this failure of the Saturn in the United States was the lack of strong exclusive titles. Believe it or not, the best titles for the Saturn were left overseas because of corporate myopia, right? Lack of communication, competition between departments. In the previous run, the American market, the American offices had really outperformed in many ways the Japanese headquarters. And you can start seeing corporate rivalries there, right? And it's well documented in books now. If you read the console wars, you can go back to that. It really gives a really good description of what actually happened back in the day. And so many things happen. So it's not only one factor, right? Many of the most popular video games of the time were available on multiple consoles also, so you didn't necessarily have to get it on the Saturn. In addition, the console was really criticized for that, for having a weak library of games. You can think of a bunch of games. I can tell you that if they had released Devil Summoner here, it would have been a hit. That was a great game for the time, and it still is a playable game. There's translation patches out there, but there's so many shooters out there, so many RPGs that they could have put out that really would have been a hit here in the US, and there were unique titles that would have stood out within the market. But when you put it all together, guys, it's a PR and the marketing. And this is something that companies really don't focus on a lot of times, and they ultimately fail. Initially, Sega planned to release the console at a relatively low price, and that got out. And then abruptly, they changed course. So you can understand how people were just pissed off when they came out with $100 higher, when they came out $100 higher than the PlayStation. This really confused consumers and really discouraged a lot of people from buying the console. Overall, the failure of the Sega Saturn was a result of a bunch of things going wrong for them at the same time. But all of them were self-inflicted wounds, whether it was PR, whether it's infighting within the company, whether it's the lack of strong exclusives, whether it was the crappy marketing strategy. I mean, it all came in. This is why it's so hard to launch a console these days. You need to put all those ducks in a row. And of course, the name of the game is the game. You have to have those killer apps. There has to be a reason for somebody to pay the extra $100 if that's what you're asking for. And that wasn't there in the beginning with the Sega Saturn. Eventually they came out with some really great games. But by that time, the destiny was already sealed for the Sega. While it's difficult to say for certain whether or not any of these factors was the primary cause, right? I think all of them combined contributed to factors to its commercial failure. And for me, not having more memories with this console, but let me tell you, it is the most beautiful console that I own. I am proud to say that I bought it for $50 when I was completely broke, and I was playing games that were, I was buying for $1, $2, $3, because nobody wanted them back in the day. And look at the prices now. Man, what a legacy this console has. And to me, to this day, it's still the most beautiful console in my favorite console of everything that I own in my collection. All right, guys, I will catch you on the next one. I hope that gave you some insight into the business aspects of what made this console a failure. But these are things that you can see in other companies today, and they always happen at the wrong time. All right, guys, I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.
New videos every Monday and Sunday. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Gen X Gamer. Remember to like and subscribe, click that notification bell, and remember, never ever be afraid to be happy. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.